So now, according to cognitive load theory, the key thing you have to do as a teacher or a lecturer is optimize the load that your student is carrying in working memory, in that present state where they're trying to work with 4 or 5 things at the same time. Now, the real risk you have is that you can get cognitive overload. Right? That's when, as a teacher or a lecturer, you've actually not designed your lecture or your lesson properly. And what's happening is you're actually reducing the ability of your learner to make decisions because their working memory and their resources are overwhelmed. Now, how can they be overwhelmed? Well, the first thing that can happen is you can make your intrinsic load, that's the actual task that you're doing, you can make it too hard or too difficult for them to work with, and they're struggling with it and they can't make sense of it, and that overloads them. But worse than that, actually, is when your extraneous cognitive load is too heavy. Now, remember, your extraneous load are all the extra things you're trying to do to help the learner or the student to understand. And sometimes when that's badly designed, the learner's trying to sift through your own way to try and do this lesson and learn it, and they can't make sense of it, and that pushes them into this cognitive overload space. And you can see the way they've done it over here. We know that working memory is limited, and look what they've done over here. They've indicated that it's gone right over. Now, the student, when they're doing that, they're in a state where they can't actually learn optimally. So let's take a look at how they suggest you work it. It's actually pretty simple in some ways, and later on we're going to give you tips, learning techniques and teaching techniques on how to do this stuff. So now, what do you do if there is cognitive overload, right? Well, one of the first things that you can do is you can decrease the intrinsic load. Now, what do you mean by that? You're going to simplify the learning task. You're going to get it closer to where the learner is, so that when the learner is doing the task is suited to the level of the learner. Now, that's the first key step you can do. But more importantly, you have to develop the skill set to make sure that the extraneous load is actually reduced. Now, you'll see as soon as they say that, they're going to give you some things, some tips, and they say you can reduce split attention. Now, you're probably not going to know what that is yet. You're certainly going to know about reducing disruptions. But split attention is a situation where what's happening is all the information a young novice student needs is not on the page right there. You've kind of scattered it all over the show. You've kind of put it in places where they've got to search for it, rather than giving them a simple, focused task with all the information there. Now, let's say you do have a situation where you get your intrinsic load nicely balanced over here, and on top of that you make sure that your extraneous load isn't so heavy. The stuff that you've put in is actually only taking up some of the student's time, and it's effective and it's working well. Well, what does that do? That opens up the wonderful, fantastic space for your germane load, for the student to be thinking and engaging and asking questions about what's actually going on in a way which makes sense, where they are, as I've said before, meaning making. And you can only do that if the intrinsic load is actually close to where they need it to be, and you've reduced the extraneous load by making sure that your materials are well designed and pushing the learner to the task that they've got to do, so that when they're doing that task, they can actually think about it and make meaning about it. So there, at the heart of it, you have why we call it cognitive load theory, and why you've got to be careful of cognitive overload.